The tolling of the town bell continued, far past the point of being any useful sort of alarm. From the sound of it, Hal thought it likely that Elsa Shoren herself had come into possession of the rope, having most likely wrestled it from the hands of the bell ringer. If that was the case, then all the better. The distraction Elsa was most likely providing to the elders, who would be left in turn to wrestle the rope from her hands, would afford Hal and Alena more time to search the Palter's chambers. They made their way past the desk in the reception area and stalked down the hall. Hal nodded ahead to the only door that was left ajar, no doubt by the harried innkeeper and his wife after having witnessed the scene of a murder. Hal moved into the room first, and Alena followed. Neither disturbed the angle of the open door. The metallic scent of blood hit the back of Hal's throat on her first breath.
"This way,"
she whispered, winding past a toppled chair in the small foyer, back toward the dimly lit bedroom. She sensed Alena tense. Though the candles were snuffed and the curtains drawn, there was enough light for them to see the pool of dark blood on the floor. Alena, Hal knew, had not tensed out of fear. She wasn't the kind of girl to become afraid at the sight of blood. The stillness was her way of focusing her senses. Hal had learned much of her own skill in tracking from studying Alena. She imitated Alena now, becoming motionless so that she could be more sensitive to the clues around her. Looking at the vast dark pool, her thoughts returned to the slight woman whose blood this was. Hal only let her mind dwell there for a moment, and for that moment she allowed herself to feel pain and pity for the woman. Mrs. Palter was an innocent who had lost her life to one she so trusted. Hal glanced up at Alena. How terrifying those last moments must have been. How awful the realization. But she could not dwell on the feelings of sorrow. It would do no good in the work they had to do next. Careful not to disturb so much as a drop of blood, Hal stalked the perimeter of the small, square room, moving about it clockwise as Alena moved in the opposite direction. 3 clues presented themselves without hesitation. A torn bit of lace, a toppled candle lying in a puddle of its own hardened wax, and a silver button. It was the button that held Hal's attention. As she came around the perimeter to meet Alena again, she pointed to where it lay on the floor near the pool of blood.
"Tell me if I'm mistaken, but wasn't Cather Palter wearing a green vest with 3 buttons just such as that one when we met him in the woods?"
Elena's look was somber.
"Your memory is as accurate as always, I fear."
"Then it is true. His transformation occurred in this room. He killed his own wife and then fled through the Warrens' farm, snacking again, and then into the woods."
"Yes, so it seems."
But Hal could tell by her voice that she wasn't convinced. Not entirely.
"What is it? What has caught your eye?"
Alena gestured to the pool of blood.
"I can't help but wonder. The blood is here, so much of it on the floor. But what of the bones, the bits of flesh, the hair and fabric, the things the beast would not have devoured?"
Hal stepped back, taking in the scene with fresh eyes. Elena's was an important question to ask, but before Hal's mind could settle into answering it, something else claimed her attention. Behind Alena, the door of the closet was cracked just enough for Hal to make out what was inside. At the sight, Hal's heart quickened. Alena noticed immediately. Her brow furrowed in question, and she turned to look over her own shoulder. They both stood staring for a long moment. In the closet was a chair. It was an ordinary enough chair, besides the fact it was sitting in the closet. But that in itself wouldn't have been enough cause for concern, and that had not been what had sent Hal's heart to hammering in her chest. It was the leather straps and belts that hung from the chair. More than a dozen, of all lengths, ripped and shredded, that had given her pause. And there were 3 locks, 1 on the chair's seat and 2 on the floor.
"That seals it, then."
"He knew."
"Of course he did."
Elena's voice was sharp.
"We must stop him. We should—"
But she never finished her thought, because in one fluid motion Hal wrapped her arm around Elena's midsection, drawing the girl to her breast and pulling her into the shadows. Together they stood still and silent. They were so well practiced in this form of concealment that their breaths instinctively fell into sync. low and shallow, difficult even for the most astute of creatures to detect. It had been the silence that had alerted Hal, or at least the lack of the clamouring noise, which had been sounding continuously up until that point. The bell was no longer ringing. That would mean that the murder investigation was on. The din of echoing footsteps and muffled voices confirmed it. The townsfolk were headed to the scene of the crime, to the very room where Hal and Alena were now pressed into the corner. The creaking of the door to the inn said to Hal and Alena that they could not go out the way they had come, at least not without needlessly rousing suspicion. As a rule, they avoided run-ins with the townsfolk whenever possible. The townsfolk tolerated Hal and Alena. They accepted the presence of the trackers and Gatstuff whenever the two came to town, because they had aided visitors and townsfolk alike on their journeys through the Ulvenwald. But at the same time, the townsfolk knew that Hal and Alena lived in the dark woods, and for that reason they were considered other. Glances were cast, suspicions shared in hushed voices, and prayers uttered in passing. Hal sensed as much fright as dislike on the sense of those to whom she came too near. It would do no good to be found at the scene of a murder. Alena nodded to the window in the back of the bedroom, the one that opened into the alley. Perfect. Hal smiled at Alena's ever-dependable adeptness at getting them out of tight situations. On their way out, Hal carefully and quietly closed the door to the closet. There was no reason for the townsfolk to see the thing that would so rattle and upset them. No point in stirring up such worry that would surely come with even the barest hint of the presence of a lycanthrope. The people need not believe they were being hunted, for they were not. Hal and Alena would handle this. They would protect the innocent. The Ulvenwald and its threats were for them to manage, and they would. They timed the opening of the window with the banging open of the outer door to the room. The sliding of wood over wood as they closed the window was then drowned out by the thumping of heavy boots and competing baritone voices as the elders and other townsfolk flooded the room. Hal and Alena climbed down into the alley without any of the townsfolk being the wiser. They hadn't much time. The sun was already kissing the horizon when they arrived back at their camp deep in the Ulvenwald. Each quickly but deliberately strapped on her silver. Of course, they always carried one small blade of it. It would be foolish to be completely unprepared. But until recent events, there had seemed no need to carry more. Now they found both the need and means to carry nearly all of it with them. Silver-tipped arrows, swords, spears, and daggers. The metal gleamed with power. As soon as they were equipped, they left their camp again. Moving as one, they navigated the maze of brambles Hal had planted around their home as a safety measure, and pressed out into the darkening woods.